Next 30-minute conversation, Matthew is going to sit down with Texas Metropolitan Blueprint author Sherry Greenberg of the University of Texas at Austin. She joined us this morning. But where, among other responsibilities, she serves as chair of Good Systems that focuses on ethical AI. The Texas Metropolitan Blueprint includes a series of recommendations regarding the state's developing regulations, frameworks, guardrails, and processes to ensure that AI is used responsibly and ethically as cities and metropolitan areas leverage AI across domains such as education, energy, healthcare, and transportation. We have a half hour for our conversation here before lunch, and I turn the program over to Matthew.
Hello there.
Hello.
Sherry and I, to give a sign of how much attention AI is getting right now, I think this is the fourth straight business day that you and I will be having a conversation about this. We talked on the phone on Friday,
this is
on a
true.
podcast on Monday, on the phone on Tuesday, and now here we are.
It seems it's all things AI, right?
Exactly. So you talk a lot about the promises and perils of AI.
Right.
And I think what we're going to talk about today is specifically cities and how they can both react to and prepare for both of those things, the promises and the perils. I think cities, along with governments, from all levels, are really talking right now about how they can use this technology, how they can protect their citizens from this technology, where they need to make sure that they're not using the technology in order, to avoid harm and things like that. But let's talk about the sort of the positives first.
The glass half full.
The glass half full, exactly. What in your research, you've been researching AI in government for several years now. Where have you kind of seen the most interesting uses of artificial intelligence at the city level in particular?
Yes, there are actually lots of use cases of using AI, artificial intelligence, at the city level. And they kind of fall into different buckets. The first one is automating tasks and administrative work. So when you think about this, think about, for instance, applying for construction permits. I think that was mentioned in the housing panel, right? There is a lot that goes into getting permits for construction, whether it's residential permitting or otherwise. And cities have been dealing with this, and some would say not very successfully, for quite a while, and it can really slow down projects. So Honolulu, for instance, decreased time to complete residential permits by 70% by using AI. Austin City Council approved, I think it's a 3-year contract a few months ago, to look at using AI for approving new construction plans, hopefully beginning to pilot that this summer. Also, when we look at automating tasks, it enables employees to focus on what matters. So we want our employees in cities to actually be working with people, to actually be looking at where we need to be in our cities, how we analyze what's going on in our cities. And so with AI, you not only can automate tasks such as permitting, but you can look at automating a lot of those lower level tasks that don't require that critical thinking from our employees, whether it's the Excel spreadsheet, planning meetings, summarizing meetings. There's a lot to be said for AI being your digital assistant, your personal administrative assistant.
Right. This is basically the idea that it's those menial tasks, the pouring through pages of documents to find different issues and things like that. It seems there's a lot of that in kind of government bureaucracy right now, and sort of what you're saying is the more that you can use AI for that, the more opportunities there might be to bring those efficiencies, make those processes go faster.
Right, and it's not just a government, certainly in business too, and in larger corporations, and in consultancies such as McKinsey, right? They're finding we can free up capacity of our employees for those higher level skills. By using AI for kind of some of this low-hanging fruit, we would say, some of these administrative tasks, but also by automating tasks. Now, that doesn't mean that you still don't have to have an employee involved in the permitting process. However, with AI, you can really speed up a lot of that coordination of all the different tasks that are required, for instance, within a city, all the different departments, all the different approvals to get through that, to then have somebody look at it and review it.
So where else do you see this being as a possibility? Where else can those efficiencies be found, do you think?
Sure, there are lots of other areas. So data is very important to all of us, and certainly the privacy of our data. And data is important in being able to make the most informed decisions. So I think another area is enabling our cities to be data informed in their decision making. Now, a lot of us have heard about this, for instance, in healthcare, where you've seen AI used to pour through so much data and perhaps detect a disease in someone that humans wouldn't have been able to, or to pour through so much data and find treatments that a human wouldn't be able to. Well, think about the amount of data in our cities, and then the ability for AI to pour through that data and to find solutions and make predictions and make efficiencies that we as humans could not. So I think that this data-informed decision-making is another one, which feeds into lots of other areas that we could talk about using AI in cities.
Yeah, one thing that just comes to mind as you're talking is like traffic management, right? I get into a rage
Yes.
every morning as I'm driving to work about why aren't these stoplights more efficient, right? But you could see how you could possibly use AI to evaluate traffic patterns or different things like that.
Well, as a matter of fact, you read my mind, because the next thing on my list is, in fact, transportation and traffic. And we are really seeing how AI can be used to make traffic signals more responsive. Okay, and this is really important when we look at the traffic management in our cities, the ability to make those signals more responsive to what's actually happening in the moment on the ground. And many cities are using this in this way. And we're also seeing it being used for dynamic pricing, for instance, for parking, which can really help with supply and demand of parking in our cities, and rerouting traffic.
Is this working? I mean, what have we seen examples of how this has changed traffic, for example?
It is working. It's working in rerouting traffic, in making those signals in a way that traffic flows faster, and certainly in rerouting traffic where we see accidents or other situations where we need to reroute. We're also seeing, for instance, in the DFW metro area, where Arlington, Dallas, Fort Worth, Garlic, and McKinney are all using AI for their traffic signals and traffic congestion. So we're seeing that in the Metroplex, for instance.
Very interesting. Okay, let's talk about the flip side of this coin, right? We talked a little bit about the promise. Now the peril.
Can I interject quickly before we get to peril?
Please
because
do.
there's some more promise
Okay,
actually
great.
out there. So in your last panel, there was a discussion of resilience, and there's a big role for AI in crisis management, because in the resiliency, some of the discussion was on some of these crises that we see: the floods, the wildfires, the hurricanes, the tornadoes. Let's see, hail, we have that too in Texas. And so what we're seeing is that AI can really help with crisis management. We're seeing it being used for wildfires, for floods, in fire departments, with EMS, in various cities across Texas. So that's another one.
Let's just pick an example out of there, or maybe there's one that stands out to you, but like wildfires.
Right.
What does AI have to offer a city with regard to wildfires?
Sure. So we're all familiar with, of course, what happened in California, but Central Texas also is at great risk for wildfires. And the city of Austin has been using AI to help with predicting and detecting wildfires. So that's an example, because Central Texas is at great risk when it comes to wildfire.
When we're talking detecting, it's like looking for tracking the weather and identifying
tracking
when it might
the
be
weather. We just yesterday across the state had and the night before, winds that were unbelievable, right? So we had the red flag warnings. And so you're detecting what's the weather, what's the temperature, what's the drought condition, where do we see a spark and a wildfire beginning? How do we, get on top of that quickly?
Okay. Okay. And Austin, I read recently, has the highest wildfire risk of any large metro area in the country outside of California. So,
That's right. And that's what I was saying. People don't realize that Central Texas and Austin has this kind of risk. And communicating with residents is another area where AI is so important. So with AI, you could be able to communicate with residents in 60 languages, for instance. Very, very important given the number of languages. This is important certainly in emergencies, but it's important in day to day for people to be able to navigate, to answer questions, to fill out documents. Amarillo, Texas has Emma, which is an online digital assistant that has been used in Amarillo, for instance. So that's another area. And one other that I do want to discuss is infrastructure and city planning. Very important. How can we be our best at figuring out what kind of infrastructure we need and how to plan our cities? And what we're seeing being used across the country, whether it's in San Francisco or Austin or other areas, is beginning to pilot with digital twins. So you use AI to have, let's say, a digital replica of your city. And by doing that, you can test various alternatives and scenarios and get data and feedback from residents too for your infrastructure and city planning.
interesting. Okay. Very good. What do cities need to be? How should they be kind of thinking about and approaching implementing AI? I mean, it's a complicated technology with people that have a lot of sort of complex feelings. The government doesn't always have the reputation for being sort of equipped with or working with the most kind of up-to-date technology. If you were advising a city, especially maybe like a mid-sized city, what would you tell them about how to be thinking about this?
So first of all, start with the least risky applications, right? Don't just dive in. And so some of those least risky may be, well, let's see if we can use it for languages and translating. Let's see if we can use it to answer questions. Let's see if we can use AI to summarize meetings. So start with those applications that are having the least risk for you as a city and your residents. And then you build up. You build up as you have your capacity. You do need guidelines in place, right, for your employees. And, we hear a lot of discussion about that. I'll digress for a moment to say that there is a difference between regulations and policies. And that's important because regulations are law. So if a city passes an ordinance, that becomes statute, that becomes law. If in the state of Texas, bills pass, right, then that becomes a statute and becomes law. That's not the same thing as having a policy within a city or a department or a policy within the state or an agency. And we see both. We see cities using, policies and guidelines, but we also see some cities beginning to, pass actual ordinances with statutes. There is a coalition that started and is housed in the city of San Jose. The Government AI Coalition has over 100 members, and it's a terrific resource for cities. There are templates for policies and guidelines and legislations, for strategic planning. And I mention that because this really requires planning. You don't just, as I said, jump out there and go start contracting. And that's another area. When you're thinking about, and a lot of cities are thinking about, what policies do we need internally, right, for our employees, and maybe even some ordinances or, actual regulations for using AI. You also have to think about the outward facing, that what you do is affecting your residents. And a big component of this, a lot of people don't think about, is your contracting, your procurement. So if you're not developing your own AI, right? If you're going to one of the, a major company, a vendor, then if you have a goal, and this certainly I think should be one, of your residents' data, right? What should remain private? What should they know about? How should they be informed? Then you want to ensure in your contracting and your procurement that you have those kind of protections or guidelines or transparency built in for your residents.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the challenges or the worries about AI. Let's start, I guess. Explain to me the concept of algorithmic discrimination.
Yes, so algorithmic discrimination is a term that we're seeing right now. And in fact, there's a major piece of state legislation by Representative Caprioni, HB 1709, that uses that term. And there's a term that probably we're familiar with, garbage in, garbage out, right? When we talk about algorithmic discrimination, these algorithms, the AI, there's natural language processing, there's algorithms, there's math. But when we talk about the algorithms, when you think about, for instance, generative AI, ChatGPT being the one that, came upon the scene first, what you are doing is really looking at the internet and vacuuming information, right? That's really what's happening. And you're using algorithms. So to the extent that there is information out there that is not accurate, that is mis or disinformation, or that is not giving you the full picture, then what goes in really determines what comes out. And so you can have what we call this algorithmic discrimination. You can certainly have unintended consequences. You can have situations where a city perhaps was using cameras or facial recognition, right? And what the AI was trained on did not include, I don't know, faces of women or faces of different types of people, right? And this made a big difference in the training and how it identified or misidentified people.
Basically, a lot of times what we are feeding into these systems carries our biases and some of our it's based on knowledge or perceptions or language that we use kind of in everyday life, which might include some of the biases that we have that could then be, reflected in how the AI reacts in certain different ways.
Yes, and it may be fed information that's not complete or inaccurate.
Right. Okay, very good. You started to kind of touch on this too. I mean, another big aspect of this is privacy.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about some of the privacy concerns about the use of AI.
Well, so some of the privacy concerns would be around, is AI being used with is your voice, right, going to be replicated and used certainly in ways that you and others would not approve of? Is your face, your likeness, your biometric identifiers? So that just gets to your physical characteristics, right? Others would include your data, your personal data about your life, about your health, about where you travel. So there are a lot of privacy concerns around your physical presence and attributes, right? And also around your data, your personal data.
I think that, when people talk about like the kind of worst fears or worst case scenarios, they often go toward law enforcement, right?
Right.
And how, authoritarian regimes could use facial recognition technology or, even things like license plate scanners that could, in some ways like build a record of where you've been throughout a city all during that time. I'm curious just about, are there recommendations, are there best practices, are there ideas about like guardrails that should be set up around whether it's law enforcement or other things, in the way governments and cities should be using this?
Well, yes. I mean, there are guardrails that are already in place regarding, for instance, data and what should remain personal and private, whether it's your social security number, whether it is information about minors, right? So we went through with the internet and, wanting to have data online where our constituents and residents could use it. That provided lots of great information for people. However, we need to think about what we're putting online. So do you want all police data online? There are minors who have had situations that you don't want online. So even with just putting information available on the city's websites, we had to think about what kind of data, whether it's, again, your social security number or a crime against a minor, that should remain private. Also, when we think about our voices being used, and you talked about law enforcement, there's another side to that, and that is criminals out there who could be using our likeness or our voices in criminal activities. And so this issue of misinformation and disinformation is also kind of joins with your personal data, your biometric data, the use of your voice and likeness.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other challenges for law enforcement, right, is the way criminals could use it. Like you talked
Right.
about cloning people's voices.
That's right.
Tell us about the example of the case of, was it in Arizona?
Arizona.
Yeah.
So there was a case in Arizona where a young woman's voice was replicated, and criminals called her mother, and I think her high school age sister was home at the time too, and told them that she had been kidnapped, and they put her voice on. They completely replicated her voice, but in fact she had not been kidnapped. Okay, and this, as you can imagine, was a case of great trauma for the mother and for her sister, and there was legislation proposed in Arizona. So that is a case of the kind that unfortunately we're talking about.
And of course, the use of AI goes way beyond governments and cities, right? There
Oh,
are,
yes.
social media, all different kinds of outlets. And I think one of the conversations going on right now is, how should the use of AI by private companies be regulated and things like that? And also at what level they should be regulated.
Right.
And, there was an executive order signed by Biden that has since been repealed. There's
Right.
conversation going on at the state level right now, which we can get into if we have time. But because we're talking about cities, then let's talk about
Sure.
what kind of discussions are being done at the city level. What kind of opportunities are there for cities to kind of weigh in about how they want this to be used on their citizens?
So we know that federal law, right, supersedes state law, and state laws supersede local laws. But you have a situation where if residents are concerned about something and they're not seeing action at the federal level, then states may jump in because you have elected officials whose constituents are telling them, I have concerns about this. And if states are not engaging, or maybe not in the way that residents would like, then what you have is city officials, elected officials, your city council members and maybe your county commissioners are hearing from their constituents, we have concerns, we want something done about this. And so you have this kind of effect of top down, but also bottom up. And what we've been seeing, I think, when we're talking about artificial intelligence and concerns and policies, is that both cities and states have jumped in because we have not had a federal, policy making in the way that people want to see. So cities across the nation, particularly those who have been participating. Tempe, Arizona was an early one with the AI Alliance out of San Jose. Cities all across the country have been looking at how do we have a strategic plan for implementing? What kind of policies? Do we need, actual ordinances? That's been going on. Simultaneously, we have been seeing states entering into this in state legislatures and passing actual laws. You saw Colorado. I could give you, half a dozen different examples of states. Many of them are patterned after the EU and Colorado, which are looking at how do we mitigate risk. And of course, that's an approach that House Bill 1709 is also looking at here in the state of Texas.
That's right. And this is what is known as the Texas Responsible AI
TREGA.
Governance Act, TREGA. Yeah. If you want to hear more about that, check out the Texas Tribune Tribcast. We talked about it for about half an hour
That's right.
earlier this week. But I want to just touch, at the heart of that conversation, right, is the balance between protecting citizens and incentivizing economic growth and everything like that. And that has become a real conversation at the state level, because there is a concern. There are a lot of people in the tech industry raising concern about, if we are too restrictive on this, we are going to delay innovation in the United States.
Right.
We're going to push industry out of Texas into other places. And, and what they describe as sort of the most stark scenarios, we're going to push innovation into places like China, where maybe they don't have the same sorts of privacy concerns and restraints on the government. Just tell us a little bit about kind of how governments at all levels are trying to sort of balance that discussion.
Right. This is a real concern. We talk about promise and peril, but there's also this concern between what's the balance between, regulation and policies and innovation. AI is here to stay. It is accelerating as we are speaking right now. And so you cannot ignore this. And you cannot ignore the fact that others would not have protections. On the other hand, you don't want to stifle innovation and that entrepreneurship, that innovation, that ability to make those improvements. And so I think that this is the balance that we're trying to strike. And certainly when you file legislation, even when you've had many stakeholders involved, that there are going to be changes, and that it's a starting point, that it is a dialogue. And this is a real concern. We certainly don't want to stifle innovation and be behind, because others will continue. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you about something that we could probably spend another 30 minutes talking about, but given that we only have about 3, we'll have to only scratch the surface here. But that's, of course, the workforce, right? I mean, what you just described at the front end about doing all this work that used to be done by humans. What that means is you might not need as many humans working for your city or your corporation or anything like that. That is obviously going to be a concern for cities, not just about their own workforce, but about the people who live in their community and how are they going to support themselves. What should cities be doing or thinking about to prepare their citizens for a world where this is just going to continue to grow and be more influential, this technology?
In fact, we could spend hours, because this is a world where it's going to continue to grow. And cities must, as you noted, be thinking about this not only for their own employees, but for the greater community. What does that mean? It means thinking at a broad level about work and working in our lives differently, frankly. Are we going to have shorter work weeks? What would that mean? We're going to have a 4-day work week, and what would that mean? That's just an example. What does it mean for preparing people in education, all the way from pre-K through PhD, if that's where you go, from community colleges, from within industries, upskilling, taking their skills to a new level, reskilling, they need skills, de-skilling. There's a concern that people will be losing some of their capabilities. So again, it's about how do we think about what work means, how we'll be working, and how do we prepare people for that.
All right, well, there is a lot to think about and a lot to prepare, but we will have to cut it off for now. So thank you, Sherry, for being here. And I believe, I'll hand it off to Matt for our next steps here.
Thank you.
No, Sherry, thank you so much for joining us in both of these programs. We are going to take a break, 45-minute break for lunch for our in-person audience, reconvene at 1 o'clock. And just a preview of this afternoon's conversation, Sherry did a good job of teeing up some of those issues when it comes to mobility and transportation is where we'll start. Then a lightning talk on the importance of green spaces in our cities. And then we will close the day with a focused conversation on economic development. So with that, again, thank you so much, Sherry and Matthew, for the conversation.